Welcome to the Debrief.
Your no-nonsense look
At the critical talent topics shaping today's landscape.
no scripts.
No sugarcoating.
Only spicy takes, just real insight from across the industry.
I'm Ben Sesser.
I'm Chris Abbas.
I'm Tracy St. Deek, and this
Is the Debrief.
All right, welcome back to the Debrief. Today we're talking about a major shift in hiring, AI taking the first recruiter screen. So this feels very much like a hot topic right now. Many TA leaders I talk to are curious about this technology because of the obvious pain points we're seeing. Top of the funnel volume keeps climbing, hundreds of thousands of applicants per role, many of them fraudulent or significantly embellished, single digit pass-through rates, while recruiters are being asked to move faster without sacrificing consistency or fairness. I personally think talent acquisition as a field is adopting AI well. Like in Hire's 2025 State of Talent Acquisition Report, we saw nearly 70% of talent teams now use some form of AI in their recruitment process, and 76% say they feel comfortable using AI in their TA workflows, whether that's sourcing or outreach or communication. So good for us. It's great that we're early adopters and we're helping our own productivity. But here's what's new. We're only now seeing teams start to test agentic recruiters. About 7% of organizations are using agentic recruiters to actually run a pre-screen. And full disclosure, Zapier is in this early adopter bucket. We're experimenting with AI recruiter screens, so I'm very, very invested in this topic. But today, Chris, Ben, and I are asking, why is that first conversation suddenly where teams want to experiment? Like, what prompted this change? What truly improves, and what's at risk when an agentic screen takes that initial call? And how does that shift both the recruiter's role and the candidate experience? So, are you all ready to dive in?
Love it.
Very.
Okay.
I'm
So
surprised by
let's-
that. Can I say that? I'm surprised by that 7% stat. Just like, I'm actually surprised by that 7% stat.
Ooh, that's a good place to start. Okay, so let's talk about this landscape shift because I think it is accelerating. Why is the first screen getting attention right now, and why are more people open to using AI for this? And I'll just be honest, 6 to 8 months ago, I was personally not as interested in it, but that's really changing. So Ben, yeah, tell us why that is surprising to you.
I actually think that's like, well, that still feels higher than I would have expected by a little bit. I would have expected it to
Okay.
be, yeah, I think there's a lot of interest, but 7% actually adopting and having something live in practice, that feels like a high number. Again, like I'll do a full disclosure. We built the product in the space, and so also invested. But I'd say the backstory is we built a version of an AI interviewer almost 2 years ago, like first quarter of last year. But we didn't think the tech was there, so sort of shelved it. And the reason we ended up sort of reinvesting and building it this year was very beginning of this year, February, March, I started hearing, without prompting, a set of companies having an interest in putting this into practice that I was very surprised by. Some of our clients, some of our non-clients, prospects, and I'm talking like tier 1 global talent brands, publicly traded companies, some of the world's largest financial services firms, just casually, saying, eventually, or, what we want to explore is this. And that was an eye opener for me around the breadth of demand, or how demand was increasing. And a lot of it had to do with some of the market fundamentals. Not fully, I think there's actually some other dynamics at play, but I think a lot of it just is like the market fundamentals and the top of the funnel volume, and sort of how overwhelming that was, and some of the push from the top in a lot of these organizations to find levers of efficiency, and that feeling like a really interesting.
Chris, I'm really curious for your point of view, given that your team talks and works with so many different talent orgs.
Yeah, I think that, as Ben said, I think really this is fundamentally companies trying to look at the place where they have the most workload and looking to reduce that workload. For me, that's what I'm seeing. And there's so much top of funnel activity. They're looking at how they can release that burden from their teams, ultimately have more lean teams, and spend less money. So if you do the math on the funnel, the way that you reduce the team size is to take the biggest chunk of volume out of that funnel. And I think they're seeing that in the screen. So that they're trying to solve that problem. That's how I'm seeing it. I'm not sure if it's being approached right now as like, we want to give the candidate the best possible experience. We think this is the most white glove way of dealing with our candidates, because clearly that wouldn't be it. I don't think necessarily. The way I'm seeing it anyway, is that it's, I don't know, Tracy, you might have a different view on this, and you're going to come at me
I'm
now.
about
I
to
think.
jump in.
Yeah, exactly.
Get him, Tracy. Yeah.
I'm like digging myself a hole right now. But yeah, so I think what we're seeing is like it's an approach to lower the volume at the top of the funnel.
I think the top of the funnel is what really changed my view. Like at Zapier, we were getting thousands of applications in the first day or two of opening a role. And we were seeing 20% of them, sometimes up to 30% of them get flagged by like our fraud alerts, our multiple different kind of fraud alerts we have built into our system. So our recruiters were barely having time to review apps, much less screen all the folks that seemed promising on paper. And when we did get into screens, we were often disappointed that good on paper was very misleading given how AI enabled candidates are. And we caught multiple deep fakes. And this is just a very frustrating use of recruiters' time. So I think as recruiters, we want to spend time with the genuinely most promising candidates. And that time was shifting towards the majority of a recruiter's capacity going towards app review and screening, which is very low pass-through rate. So that was just not sustainable. And so that was really what changed my mind. I mean, now I think if you're a company that is hiring thousands, hundreds of interns and you're getting thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of apps, like to me, this is a no-brainer. Or if you're hiring more frontline workers, to me, this is a no-brainer. But even in a company like ours with only 800 people that are more niche roles, we just don't have the capacity to talk to everybody. And I think what made this more important was the fact that we felt like we were just missing really, really great people due to bandwidth. And that's not what we want. And so, yeah, I would come at you a little bit, Chris, but in a friendly, like nudging way, because I truly do think that there are things about this that make hiring better for candidates as well, so that they're not just, passed off because they weren't in the top, 2% of applicants that we were able to talk to.
Yeah. And so are you saying there's a different approach for different cohorts of candidates? Like inbound versus source versus referral. You're not passing everyone through the same agentic screen.
Right now, we're just piloting. And so right now
Right.
we are doing very different things with different groups of people just because we're still in testing mode. So for
Sure.
example, right now, I wouldn't use agentic recruiter screens with leadership candidates or really high touch processes, or even with source candidates. We haven't started using them because we're, trying to convince you to like come talk to us, right? But
Yeah.
I think for all of the inbound that we're getting, for us, this feels like a really good next step to experiment, because one of the things I'm really interested in terms of the data that we're looking at in our experiment is how many people that we likely would not have been able to meet with end up getting through and passing to job fit. That feels like a very important metric to me, because we're looking at opt-in rate, we're looking at completion rate, obviously we're looking at candidate experience, but how many people would we have normally just had to reject due to time and bandwidth that are now getting through to job fit? That feels like the piece where I can honestly say, like, this is allowing candidates to shine and put their best foot forward and give us better information that is going to help us see them as really high potential when maybe in their application and interview, it just didn't come out.
My first hire, like reporting directly to me, who started through an agent, like an AI screen, and that was a good experience to kind of go through that. I definitely saved a lot of time in the process. But the other thing that I definitely learned was there was just a bunch of folks where it's like, you don't have Goldman, you don't have, these sort of like heuristics of excellence on your resume. And, it's a company, I've never heard of that company. Like, what does that job even mean? But you can expand the aperture a little bit. And if you're open-minded and you give those folks a chance, like I had multiple people in like final slate where I was sort of neck and neck that would not have got an interview, full stop. And when I heard their story, it was like, this person worked, and I'll tell you, I'll kind of abstract a little. It's like, this person worked in a startup. They became the CEO. It was in like a different region of the world. I'd never heard of this startup. And so I was like, just kind of confused, but like unbelievable story, I was almost like, are you sure? And so that really was a big eye opener. There were people that you could see on paper they were an incredible fit, and they also got pretty far in the process. The person we hired I think if you saw them on paper, you'd say, wow, that's a really great fit for this role in a bunch of different dimensions. But like, there was a bunch of other folks that were right there, and no way they would have gotten an interview just because, they like, just a different background. And I've said this recently a few times, like, I don't think if I was the founder of BrightHire and I applied to a bunch of jobs right now, I would get very many interviews. And I'm being serious. I worked for some good companies, but they're not that well known. There's like, it's very competitive. And so, I'd like to believe that I had a good run at those companies. I did some interesting things. And so I would certainly value the opportunity. But long story short, like, I've seen it firsthand. It's not marketing spin, but it is definitely not the dominant reason that people are leaning in when we're in commercial conversations. It's still much more around the efficiency. And this is kind of like the side benefit, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I also think that like as the technology gets better, right? Because it is going to continue to get better. Again, 6 to 8 months ago, I would have said the technology isn't there yet. I wouldn't want to put that in front of candidates, and I wouldn't want to take a recruiter screen myself. But it is rapidly accelerating and it's only going to get better too. And so I think if you can really smooth out the candidate experience, then you also have all these other benefits that not only just allow them to share their story earlier and to shine, but also like on their own time zone as a global company. Like we're doing a lot of hiring in India and in EMEA, and we just have even more limited bandwidth to get on the phone with those people at times that are convenient for both us and them. And so I think if you can really smooth out that experience and you got to also realize all these second order benefits that can also just make hiring and hearing back faster for the candidate as well and more convenient for the candidate too. And I think that could be a huge win for like accessibility and especially for companies that are hiring globally too.
I think it's a really interesting story as well, how different generations perceive this stuff. Like my friend's daughter is a teenager looking for her first job, and she didn't want to speak to anyone in real life. She wanted to speak to as many. She was like, it was a good signal for her that if she could like WhatsApp the kind of bot that was handling the process, or could have a call with an agent, she didn't want to speak to anyone. So I think that, well, from my point of view, maybe I'm like a Luddite that wants human to human connection, but maybe like the generations that are coming would prefer this way of working, which is quite interesting to think about.
That's fascinating.
Totally believe that now that you're telling me that story, but it still kind of blows my mind. That's wild. Tracy, so are you using this in the first screen, after a first screen for a second? Like, where does this fit in your process?
Yeah. So right now, because we're early in our experimentation, we're using this as like screening 1A. So we're doing app review the same way we normally would right now.
Yep.
So we're sending groups of people to the agentic recruiter screen. It's still opt-in. So we've had about a 30% opt-in rate right now, which I think is actually higher than I thought. And so then we are moving if people pass that, then we'll do like a shorter recruiter screen with a live person that is just like more to get to know them, make sure we like, understand the process moving forward, and verify any other questions we have. But I think pretty soon we'll start moving those people right to job fit. I also personally envision a future where we are able to cut out app review altogether. And this actually replaces the application. So when you apply for a job at Zapier, the first thing you do is an agentic recruiter screen, so that we get a lot more of that in-depth insight earlier on. And then instead of reviewing apps and resumes, recruiters can look at the resume and they can look at, the video or the transcript or a summary of the recruiter screen too. So I have like a vision for how this is really going to redo the front of the funnel. But we're not there yet. And I think a lot of companies, just like your point, Ben, around the 7%, it's like we need to really slow roll this to make sure that companies, legal teams, TA teams, recruiters, candidates are all comfortable with it. And we'll all figure that out together, again, as the technology gets better.
There's very few like new disruptive approaches to things in general where it's all one way. It's all gravy. It's all bad. It's all good. So I think I don't think it's a reasonable expectation that like 100% of candidates are going to love it and it's going to work perfectly and it's going to solve all the problems and. I think it's new, and we learned that with our core product, which was I was telling this story the other day. I think one of our investors was posting something, and they were like, "We invested in BrightHire, and honestly, it was a bit of a risk. It felt like a really weird concept that was very uncomfortable. And that's just, not that long ago, right? And it kind of was at the time. I remember getting on early sales calls for our company and like a recruiting leader being like, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard and I would never do this. And I was like, so where to from here? And so like that's like every new thing.
Well, I guess then, so looking into the future, Ben and Chris, like, do we think that AI screeners could make hire better, or is it just different? And given everything that we've said about like top of the funnel pain points and needing to keep TA teams lean, like even if you didn't like the idea, like philosophically at your core of agentic recruiter screen, is this just going to be a necessary evil, or is there a third way?
Inevitable and better. Like the answer for me is very straightforward. Like all of the macro trends that are driving the sort of top of the funnel dynamics are not getting better. That's a zero probability. It's kind of how I felt when we started. It was like projecting the future. What are the probabilities? There's a zero probability that volumes are going down. Zero. Why would they? There's no reason. There's a zero probability that like fraud goes down, at least attempts, right? So that's a zero. And I just know for a fact, I'm a user, the screens are consistent, they're better, it gathers better information. And then we've already seen early data from our customers, like they're decreasing time in process, they're making more hires month over month, their pass rate from hiring manager interview to offer is way higher. Like once somebody gets to a hiring manager, the likelihood that they get to an offer is way higher. So definitely better, definitely inevitable. Will it be smooth sailing? Probably not. Meaning, there'll be Reddit threads and, all different opinions. That just feels par for the course for doing something new.
You touched on something too, where I feel like there's a lot of pushback around the bias from AI in general. And I think specifically historically marginalized communities have a reason to potentially be a little bit more wary of this too. But I agree with the point that you touched on around consistency. Like I think AI agents can have really structured questions. They can have clear evaluation logic, like it can be standardized competencies. To me, that is so much more consistent than a human recruiter who is doing 15 screens a day or something like that and feeling very, very tired at the end of the day. To me, the consistency helps reduce some of the bias and introduces more fairness. Now, of course, you're always going to have like bad data in, bad data out. So if you're training your AI and telling them what's good and what's not good, and that's all very biased, like then it will just scale the biases that humans already have. But I think there is a way that this technology can help us counteract some of that too. I'm curious what your thoughts.
Totally agree. I absolutely agree with you. And so someone asked me something, I was doing a talk and someone said, well, how's this agent going to be able to assess the culture? And I was like, what does that mean exactly? Right? Can you define your culture? If you can define it, then the system can assess that more accurately than you can and on a more consistent basis. And I think there's these throwaway terms in recruiting like culture and fit, and it's like, what does that actually mean? But if you can define it, the system can do it better than you, right? That most likely. And so I think that like Ben said, you're not going to get 100% hit rate, but it will be more accurate than humans on average.
I completely agree, and I think one of the biggest risks is like sloppiness, like, and this ties back to the definition and the rubric side. Like, it's much easier to spin up tech now, and I think the biggest risk for this being a net positive and being successful in general in the market is sloppy product creation that doesn't have care. This thing will interview in 99 languages perfectly, no bias, and we've been working on it for 3 weeks. And you're sort of like sit there and think, that is impossible. That is impossible that you achieve that, but we shall see. And then honestly, sloppiness on implementation. You can't just use an AI interviewer and be like, I just turned it on and it's perfect. It's working great. Because if you can't define what success looks like and you're not paying attention and you're not diligent, you have to put the work in to get the results and know what you're looking for. And so I think that's actually the biggest risk is like people experiment really quickly with bad products and without care, and they don't get the results, or or it gives a bad reputation for how incredible the technology is, to your point, because AI is great at comparing context to a rubric and evaluate. It's so like I did an interview for a role that I wasn't the hiring manager for, with somebody else's role, but I interviewed a woman and I went back and looked at her AI interview because I was curious. And I remember thinking like I had this general fuzzy feeling in my head of like, this is terrible and this is amazing. Like this person's about here. And then I looked at the output of the AI interview and I was like, that is a extremely concrete, crystallized, and much more like structured version of what's in my brain. Like it's similar, except way better and sort of like an eye-opening moment. And it's like AI is great at that, but if you're sloppy, it's going to be not great.
Yeah, I agree. I also think there's something around, you made me think of this too, around utilizing AI to be able to sort of level the playing field in a number of things that could be potential unconscious human biases too. So one of the things I love about some of what AI can do for us is that they can translate in multiple languages. And I think depending on the type of company you are, for example, it could be more comfortable for a candidate to do a first interview in their native language versus in English, for example. I also think like focusing on the content of answers and the transcript and AI comparing the transcript to the criteria and the rubric versus, getting distracted by a speech pattern or accents or anything like that, that unconscious bias could potentially factor into that decision. I think that's really positive. So I mean, there is just a lot that I think that, again, agree with you that AI can scale if we build it properly and if we're ensuring that we're reducing the risk. I'll tell you one thing that's like interesting from when I was doing a lot of demos of different AI agentic screeners, and we probably did like 5 or 6 this summer. And I can't even honestly remember which one it is. But there was one thing on the recruiter dashboard that showed tone and candidate interest. And it was showing like when a candidate was more excited and sounding more engaged, and in places where it wasn't, sounding like it was like lower energy, et cetera. And this was like an early demo, and I said, you have got to cut that out. Like you cannot, I do not, even if it doesn't affect the scoring, you absolutely cannot have that, and recruiters can't see that. Because someone like me, who sounds generally excited about everything, 95% of the time, I would score really high, or I would come across as a more engaged candidate. And that is just like how I speak and my tone and my, and personality, whatever. And we wouldn't want to bias against different cultural patterns of speech or tone or pauses or things like that. So I think, for those of us 7% who are testing this technology and for those who are building it, we have a real responsibility and obligation to shape this for the industry in ways that are reducing that bias from the very beginning. Even when, things have fraud detection built into them, what are those fraud detection signals?
Yeah.
Is it about pacing and tone? Or is it about you're clicking in a bunch of different tabs and so it looks like, it's like there's different ways that you can evaluate even fraud that brings up flags. And it's really important to get in the details, I think, as a design partner with any of these companies to ensure that we're really shaping the industry and the technology we want to see.
Do you think that people will submit a resume in 5 years? Like, will people have a resume? No,
I'm still shocked that it still happens. I'm like, why a resume still a thing? It's like there's a LinkedIn. Like, just use LinkedIn. Like, I would never put a resume together. If someone asked me for that now, I'd be like, it's such a hassle.
I agree.
Such a hassle. There's this thing called AI. There's this thing called AI, Chris. That's kind of the problem. It's actually not a hassle. It's actually too easy. That's the problem here. Yeah.
I do care about where you worked and how long you worked there, but everything else under those bullet points under those, I don't care about because, again, it is oftentimes just noise. Because I know that it has been AI enabled and established, and I'm really interested in like talking to the person or hearing more of those insights and stories. So I'm with you. That's why I think like this top of the funnel has to be completely redone. So then I'll ask you both then. So what does this mean for recruiters? If AI agentic screens are the future and that takes on the repetitive discovery work, where should recruiters be spending their time? And does that change either the bar for recruiter skills or shift the mix of skills?
I think there's two things I'm thinking is, if I look at huge demand across our client base, and actually one of the roles that I think is very safe from AI replacement is sales, right? I think that go-to-market hiring and sales skill sets are huge, and I think that recruiting is going to become more of a sales role over time. Um, and the playing field is going to be more and more leveled for companies at the early stage of the funnel. The access, the discovery, the sourcing of these candidates.
I largely agree. First of all, I think that it's gonna be a long time before it's like all screens. Or I mean, look, I'm in the business, but I just don't think that that's gonna be the case for a while. So it's not like that this is gonna go away. If you think about the recruiting job historically, well, let's say like particularly in like the last 15 years, there was a very significant amount of like repetitive work to do. Not all grunt work, talking to a candidate and doing a screen, I don't consider grunt work, depending on the context, but a lot of that. And then there's this idea that, I'm going to be a talent advisor and kind of play that role with my hiring teams, but I don't have good market data. I have no idea what anyone's talking to the candidates about. I have very limited information on their, like what they demonstrated in any of these conversations. Like it's very hard for me to frame and coach and guide a hiring team to feel more confident and to make good decisions and to have a good process. And now those teams should have better data, visibility into every like candidate conversation with the whole hiring team, like full access to the context, like just be way more positioned to be like a true talent guru and be like, look, I know product marketing. I've seen a million product marketers in the last few years. I understand what you're looking for. I understand the business. I like you talk to them about this. I heard that. Like just being good at understanding and recognizing talent, making decisions is a skill. And, like a recruiter will have more context and more reps than anyone else. And so I'm hopeful that they'll be deploying that in a way that's like a reframe of the role. I can't speak to like the overall number of those roles, right? It just depends on like the labor market and how hiring looks. But I think, and then like every N+1 employee, hypothetically in the future, like an AI enabled future, is like a higher leverage hire or like a very leveraged hire. So the stakes are even higher, And so you're sort of guiding people through a multi-$100,000 decision that has like probably a multi-million-dollar, maybe like lifetime impact in one way or the other. That's kind of my hope.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Okay, I think that we should wind up this discussion, but I would love to hear just from each of you, and I'll join into you. What is a last parting thought or a spicy take or something you're watching in the future on this topic? Chris, we'll start with you.
I think that leaders need to be super hardcore about getting adoption for technology tools in their business. And I think if people don't get on board, they need to make serious changes quickly.
I love it. Ben.
I think more stories about incredibly overlooked, hidden gem talent getting great roles and finding that the process really did a good service for them in a really meaningful way are going to come to the fore. And that's going to give folks more conviction. I also think that the technology is increasing at an incredible rate, and people who have some perception of a tool that they demoed 9 months ago, and if they let that linger for another 6 months and just kind of assume that that's the way it is, are going to be astonished and left behind because they're going to not be deploying this technology and scooping up the great talent that Zapier is, frankly. So I think those are two.
Okay, here's mine. I don't know if it's spicy within this group, but I will say if companies are implementing AI recruiter screens specifically for just efficiency, I think they will lose, period. I think it introduces a lot of risk. I think it really can lead to shortcuts that negate your talent brand. I think if you're indexing on candidate experience and a focus on quality, ensuring higher quality decisions based on better information, you will win. And if you focus on candidate experience, even if that is, to your point earlier, been like a secondary reason why people are interested in this, I think you will win because you will be seen as a company that is trustworthy and transparent and accountable for decisions in the world of AI. And I think that piece is going to win you a lot of great talent overall. So that's what I think. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to the debrief. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow the show so you never miss what's next. More hot takes, more real talk, more talent insights coming your way in the next episode. So tune in and get the debrief.